Josh Tyler's doppelganger, played by Tim Heidecker in both cases, perfectly mimics his above ground version of the asshole walk.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Skiffy Fanny Shows at the movies.
We're human too, you know. Eyes, teeth, hands, blood, exactly like you.
Ew, it's creepy.
It's true.
True, though.
I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
And I'm Paul.
And on today's show, we're going to discuss Us, written and directed by Jordan Peele, starring Lupita Nyong'o, Winston Duke, Elizabeth Moss, Tim Heidecker, Shahadi Wright Joseph, and Evan Alex, among some others.
But before we do that, another friendly reminder that we still want to hear from you. So, please share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. We're still hoping to put together a listener mailbag episode, so if you have any thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, queries, riddles, anything, please give us the things we'd like to hear what you have to share with us.
Yeah, because Brandon, that's what we need now is all of our audience who've seen The Batman to do their impersonations of the Riddler.
Yes, please. We will give you all a Riddler episode for no real reason. We haven't even seen The Batman yet.
Well, all right, we got a movie to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a brief summary. Emphasis on brief, not every detail.
So you don't want the giant detail of Doom. I could do the giant detail of Doom, but I won't.
No. Give us the 60 seconds or less breakdown.
Okay,
Go.
So in 1986, a young girl named Adelaide goes to the amusement park and has a very scary experience, meeting what appears to be her double. Years later, Adelaide is all grown up, has a family, is going camping at a vacation home with her loving husband Gabe and her children, Zora and Jason. She's clearly still thinking about what happened because they're not too far away from that city and the amusement park. And they have neighbors who they're jealous of, especially of their car. Gabe is trying to be a good father, even though he buys the crappy boat, although the crappy boat saves them. But then weird things happen when 4 figures appear outside their house, 4 figures that look exactly like them. This devolves into a home invasion, an escape from a home invasion, combat with other doubles, and this is all tied in with the plot trying to show what exactly happened to Adelaide back in 1986 when she went into that funhouse mirrors. And it seems that there are doppelgangers living underneath the earth who are coming up to reclaim what they're owned. But there is a deep, dark secret about these doppelgangers that we're going to have to put after the spoiler wall about.
Well, that gets to the basic rundown of this movie, yeah.
I could have gone into much more
Paul.
detail, but I did not.
Well, let's get to some general reactions first before we get into a lot of spoiler territory, which is inevitable here because of where the bulk of the conversation's likely to take us. So I'll go to you, Brandon. What are some general thoughts you want to say about Us?
I'm glad that you came to me first because I am an oddity on the face of planet Earth in that this was the first time that I've seen a Jordan Peele horror movie. Not for lack of desire. Us and Get Out have been on my radar for quite some time now. Recently, the trailer for Nope came out and I am very intrigued. But when Us came out, a lot of things were happening in 2019 and I didn't get a chance to actually see it. So I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do it, primarily because this podcast is a very good impetus for me to consume media, because I love you all. And with that being said, this movie is wild. I kind of regret not only seeing it recently, but having not seen Get Out first, not because they're connected, or not because I implied that they're connected in any way, but because I feel like there is something about Jordan Peele's writing and directing process that I would have gleaned sooner if I had watched this after seeing Get Out, because this movie is very dense. Even though Get Out is dense, it is very obvious what it is about in ways that Us wasn't necessarily for me, in large part because I'm not American, and I will get to what I mean by that very, very soon. But I really enjoyed it. It is a lot. I enjoy in particular that a lot is happening in what is considerably a very short space of time, and that a lot of it is just violence, but all of the violence has meaning, because all of the violence are attached to a kind of root concern that I thought was really neat.
Fair enough, Brandon. All right, Paul, what about you? What are some general thoughts from you before we get to specifics?
Okay, well, I went into this movie as blind as I could, and I had different expectations on what I knew the basic high level thing. Family is attacked by doppelgangers. And I was trying to figure out as things were going on, well, what are these doppelgangers? Are they aliens? Are they fae? Are they something else? And the answer was completely delighted me because of the details and of the rich science fictional history, kind of like Get Out, that it taps into it. I wasn't expecting that. I should have after Get Out. It's like Jordan Peele clearly knows his genre stuff and clearly wants to go into some of these odder taproots, and he does that with this movie, and I found that delightful. I mean, the violence, as Brandon says, is all of it makes sense and all is in character, and sometimes is rather shocking. The immolation scene was like, oh my god, like that kind of made me squirm among other violence that we see, and there's plenty of metaphor and imagery that I really want to think about. I really wish I had a chance to see this movie again because I think it could stand up to multiple viewings and thinking about. Not even just because of the twist ending, just because of what the movie goes through and what it's saying and what it does. That makes sense.
Interesting. I'm intrigued by what that means, Paul. Which brings it to me,
I think I'm
going to be the odd duck out here, which is I really enjoyed this movie right up until the big reveal at the end, and then I immediately went, well, that makes absolutely no sense, and you have pulled me immediately out of what this story has been about up till this point. I found that this is that this happens in a lot of stuff, but sometimes happens in horror, which is sometimes it's better not to explain things, because by explaining them, you make it worse, which is not true of all things, and perhaps is not true of what will come out of Jordan Peele's other work. But here I felt that the film focused too much on trying to give us answers, and in doing so created plot holes that I could not unsee, and which disrupted my enjoyment of what the film was trying to do. And it got at the end to the point where I actually lost sense of what this film was about, outside of its general plot. And that was a problem for me because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to be gleaned here about the film's approach to, for example, the sort of wealthy urban elite, which this family, but to some degree their friends are even more so representative of, and even to some degree its representation of the Santa Cruz area, which led me down a rabbit hole to discovering that Logos, the used bookstore in downtown Santa Cruz, is closed now, which depressed me greatly. There's just a lot of stuff going on with how it's treating class, etc., but I think by the end sort of kind of undermines it for me, and I'm sure we'll get to that. I didn't think it was bad. I want to be very, very clear. Brandon, you and I recently watched a horror film we thought was certainly bad. This I would not say is on that same scale.
To clarify, a horror movie that could have been 6 good horror movies.
Yes. So I think at this point we can get into some specifics.
So, I have a specific because it opens with a question.
Oh no.
It follows off from something that you did in fact mention, Sean, which is that this movie is very obviously aware of class in a way that I think is very interesting. And part of why I think that is interesting is because the protagonists are all black, which, of course, as a black person, I dig a lot. But, also, putting them in a position to be simultaneously critical of class, but the movie is also critical of them, is very intriguing. But it means that I need to have a thing clarified for me because it is obviously significant to the movie as an image. And it's a thing that I've only heard about in my life twice. So I'm gonna ask Paul to clarify this thing for me. Not because I think Sean can't, but because, again, I don't hear from you very often, Paul. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
I would like you to explain to me what is Hands Across America.
Okay. Hands Across America was an 80s thing. It was a charity sort of fundraiser thing where basically they got people to basically make a human chain across the continent. It was a huge thing at the time. I remember this thing, and they were trying to get as much of the chain as humanly possible, even across the terrible regions, like through the desert and stuff. It was basically a big fundraising effort. They tried to get stars. There was a TV extravaganza. It was huge. I mean, I remember in '86, I was in New York. I was wondering, well, maybe I could go and see where it goes through New York, and that idea was shut down by my parents. Like, no, you don't want to go do that because it's in a bad area of Manhattan, blah, 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 blah. Pity it had not gone across Staten Island, because then I would have been able to have a better chance of sneaking out and seeing this, because it was just the strangest weird phenomena. It's just like, we're going to raise money by getting people to hook up in a giant human chain.
Mm-hmm.
Millions of people lined up, and I will just note...
Millions, yes.
Among the people involved in this, I will tell you, Brandon, and you will be very amused, included Kenny Baker and Chewbacca in lines at different locations, President Ronald Reagan.
Of course, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Of course. Because it's like one of those feel-good things, It's morning in America, wearing a human chain.
Let me recuperate my identity by doing this absolutely doltish thing.
Oh, just wait. There's more. Several dozen Elvis Presley impersonators, Kathleen Turner, Michael J. Fox, David Copperfield and Michael Jackson, Mickey Mouse and Goofy, Kenny Loggins, and C-3PO.
Wait, Minnie didn't join in.
Minnie did not join in.
Minnie did not join in the human chain.
Yeah, did not.
Minnie saw this for what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
And stayed home.
Yep. Edward James Olmos, Yoko Ono. There are a bunch of other people. Jerry Lewis. A lot of folks.
I mean, it kind of reminded me of the cornball cheesiness of a Jerry Lewis telethon, which is probably something neither of you know anything about, which is hilarious to me.
I was born in 1983.
Yes,
Paul.
exactly. So you've never saw a Jerry Lewis telethon in your life. And Brendan has no idea what I'm talking about.
I will say that Wikipedia does say this, and so it has no citation, so take it with a grain of salt. But supposedly, when taking into the number of people that were at the event, the maximum number of people that participated, it is possible that line could have, if unbroken, could have gone across the entirety of the continental part of the United States.
Mm-hmm. But it did not complete.
That was there at the time. It was not that complete because, stuff like just going through the California desert and Nevada and stuff. So there were parts where it was broken. I mean, there were people like symbolically like holding out to other places and stuff, but it wasn't actually physically complete because it was just too ambitious a project. But there were areas where, especially like in the Northeast, where you had this human chain going for hundreds of miles for real.
Yeah, raised $34 million in 1986. But I will note that this is the final visual sequence of Us, which is, I imagine, one of the reasons you brought it up, Brandon, including all of the references to it at the beginning of the film, the t-shirts. But at the end, we see all the people dressed in red, in their red jumpsuits, essentially almost like cordoning off a huge portion of the world.
I don't see them as cordoning off. I saw them more as like holding hands, as like showing solidarity and union that we have come up from the depths and now we are here. Because Red, the leader of the underground, basically says she wanted to do something that would make a statement. And given what happens and the whole story is revealed, that makes a whole lot of sense. Because so the fact that we find out in the end that she got kidnapped and was down there basically taking the role of the threaded. I mean, she remembered Hands Across America, so of course that's the symbol and action she was going to do when these people came up, as well as murder lots of people. But that's why she has this human chain. It's a show of solidarity, of strength, of union, of we are here. Get used to it.
And mass murder.
And mass murder.
Genocide specifically, I will just note. Genocide is what they commit.
The unthreading, and when it comes to me, I want to talk about some of that symbolism of the unthreading.
Well, I'm glad that we got to the ending.
Yes.
Ugh.
But the reason why I asked that question is, again, I am not an American, so I'm having all of these judgments uniquely as someone who was neither living in the country nor alive when it happened. But
I feel so old.
as someone who is not wealthy, everything about Hands Across America as an action that took place in the real world is the dumbest and most offensive thing that I've ever heard in my life. Here is what upsets me, and I mean not just practically, but almost poetically in a sense. Two things stand out about Hands Across America in hindsight, which is, A, the line didn't complete. And I feel like that says a lot about, on a poetic sense, about that kind of assumption of how we resolve poverty. That A, you asked people to do the least occupying thing of their time. Just be present and touch someone else on the hand. You couldn't get a line from Santa Monica to Philadelphia to close. Which is one thing. On a poetic sense, that strikes me as a very clear symbol of how hollow a lot of people's attention to resolving poverty is. That even when asked to do the bare minimum to be present as a symbol for how impactful poverty is in the world or just in your space, you couldn't just do that, let alone give $10. But the other very stark thing is, lots of people gave money, and they raised $34 million. But they only used 15 million of them for actual charity work. The rest were all operating costs. And I know running a charity is actually very expensive. But when it's more expensive than the work you were planning to do, maybe you weren't prepared to do the work. So I say all of that to say, I feel like this image in this movie is one of the most unique observations about wealth that I've ever seen in a movie as a metaphor. One, because it gave me the opportunity to learn all of this stupid shit about this absolutely ludicrous fundraising event. But also, the way that it is reframed in the movie is really poetically critical, not only about the event, but about, ultimately, as the actual event was, how we see the issue of poverty in the world and how we see the issue of wealth disparity in the world. Because Red and the other tethered aren't doing this because it's cool or clever. They're doing it because it's a symbol of their reclamation of the thing that they think that they have deserved. Which makes it very obvious that they, the tethered as a group, are an allegory for poverty itself. Which is why a lot of the definitional things about the movie, a lot of the movie's attempts to answer sci-fi questions about its premise fall flat, is because the metaphor is already valuable. These are people who have been left destitute, people who, have to struggle literally to keep themselves alive and yet have no choice but to be present. And the movie is obviously asking you as a viewer, who is wrong here in this instance? Is it the wealthy who, regardless of whether they did the work necessary to gain their wealth, are ultimately benefiting from the suffering of people who are less fortunate? Or are these tethered who enter the movie as monsters and whose goal is to harm people in order to gain their own comeuppance? Are we going to say that they're the bad guys because they're committing acts of harm, regardless of the fact that they have lived their entire lives in a forced destitution that was not under their control? And then the movie attempts to reframe that question again with the ultimate reveal that Adelaide was tethered the whole time, and Red was essentially kidnapped and replaced in order to experience this experience, which, while very hollow on its face as a twist in the movie, is an attempt to ask a very real question. Now that we've asked that question about the tethered and those who are living above ground, does the answer change knowing that Adelaide essentially isn't Adelaide? All of those things are meaningful. I think that asking those questions are good. I think that the movie ultimately works because its goal is to ask that question regardless of what the answer is, because neither of the answers are particularly pretty. So, that's one of the things that I attached to the most in the movie. This real world thing that happened in the 80s is dumb and bad, and everyone should feel ashamed.
It was so very 80s.
Well, this is part of the USA for Africa stuff, and so
we are the world, we are the children.
We are the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that one time Bono sang a song implying that, like, part of the reason why we should mourn the suffering of child soldiers in Africa is because you wouldn't want to happen to your white child. It's like,
Really?
Well, you raise a lot of great stuff here, Brandon, and you've actually made me even more irritated with the ending of this movie in explaining all of what you've just said, because part of the thing that I think is going on here is, in my personal opinion, a problem that people struggle with when it comes to metaphors, which is you present a metaphor, but then you want to load that metaphor with lots of other stuff so that if somebody wants to read the metaphor, they have to discard all of the specific details in order for that reading of the metaphor to hold. And so for us to read this film as being, as you were describing, Brandon, as a film that's about the sort of underclass that exists in a society, which even people who are maybe not knowing participants still take advantage of. In order for us to read that metaphor and that allegory, we have to discard all the specific details that it gives us, because those don't fit that allegory anymore, that metaphor that we're being given, right? So the specific details of, as we learn, that there was a secret government project to create doubles, and it made people who just shared the same soul and became tethered. How that works, I don't know. There's the fact that they just eat rabbits. Raw, apparently, so they're just murdering rabbits and eating their raw flesh. Why? No idea. How do the rabbits survive in this underground? No idea, but you've left it there. There's all of the details about Adelaide that we learn about. So Adelaide is originally from the Under Place, but then the original Adelaide is now in the Underplace and has led a revolution. What it doesn't quite make sense, but she can't speak, but like whatever. Anyway, the point is there's all this detail about like the particularities of this like underground society that for us to read this as an allegory or metaphor about poverty in the United States or homelessness or any variation of that class struggle that certainly existed in the 80s and still exists now and has largely been unaddressed, which I think rightly, Brandon, you raise in your criticism of Hands Across America, which is it raises money, but it does not fundamentally change the structural problem that it's a response to. It is a show to some degree. This film, for us to get there, to read it in that way, we have to just get rid of all of the stuff that are the particular details that Peele deliberately put in here for us to think about. And that's a huge problem for me because it means that the story that I think we want to see is not the story that's actually there. It's a different story that is muddled because it made the decision to tell us things it didn't actually need to tell us. We didn't need to know that there was a secret government program that like to create doppelgangers of people and like they got tethered, right? Apparently Dolly, the clone sheep is also tethered somewhere in the abyss, right? We didn't need to know that, right? The beginning of the movie give us these beautiful little things, these little dialogue points telling us that there are all these underground tunnels. So you could just leave it for us to interpret from that point and not tell us these particular details, but we're given them. And the second it does that, it changes the entire story. And for me, that is, to be honest, that was the moment at which I threw up my hands and went, what the fuck? It just seemed to undermine for me so much of what was going on before, where there was this home invasion, which is a huge deal, especially if we're thinking about this coming out of an 80s mindset, right? Of the idea of the home invasion and, you know, this terror of the suburbs of being invaded by like the criminal elements coming to take your stuff.
I mean, that whole big thing where Adelaide gets lost. I mean, that's a whole. I was having memories right going back to days. Oh God, this is Stranger Danger all over again. She's wandering away. Who's she gonna run into? She has that bit where she sees that one guy who has the Jeremiah 11:11 sign, and then winds up meeting herself. Did you guys look up that quote from the Bible?
Jeremiah 11:11. I did. I can't remember what it says at the moment.
I will read it for everybody. This is the King James Version. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, behold, I will bring evil upon them, which they shall not be able to escape. Though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them.
God is a very bitter person in the Old Testament, you know.
Yeah?
I think that's great that you just brought up, Paul, the Stranger Danger thing, because I think if this film were made in the 80s, it would read different than now when we've got kind of like two generations that have been influenced by the Stranger Danger campaigns. And this may be a thing that, Brandon, not being from the United States, maybe you didn't quite have that same experience. Because I remember growing up, and I'm sure, Paul, you remember it in a very different way from me, of, like, you would just be outside and your parents would just, like, you just went around and we were aware of stranger danger. But nowadays, there's, like, much more of a, kind of like Adelaide in the movie, right? Where she's hyper protective of her kids, in part from her trauma.
Adelaide now is very much more the helicopter parent, very, very vigilant. And when she loses Jason for a bit, she goes all freak out. So yeah, it's like I really appreciated that cultural shift that we see between the two time periods.
And I will say, even though I am disconnected from personally experiencing that because of time, that was an experience that I think that's an experience that existed everywhere around the same generational point for a lot of people. That there was a point in the very recent past when safety was a lot easier to navigate in the world. Like here in Trinidad, parents and grandparents used to joke that there was a point in time when you could leave your front gate open because you knew that no one was ever going to do anything to you, and now that's no longer the case. So that experience I got, and like I got that viscerally, and I really like, especially in a horror movie, like Sean, you were joking about the things that horror movies like to do that can be very upsetting. And one of them is often, no one ever checks where someone is.
Get in the car and go! Why are you hanging
thought...
around? Just leave! For
Yeah.
fuck's sake! No, don't go out and talk to the creepy people in the shadows. Lock your doors, everybody get a weapon, prepare! Stop!
Yeah. That's why I kind of liked Adelaide's relationship to both of her children, but especially Jason. Because, one, it's a very black thing, especially in the present day. That kind of helicopter parenting is not universal, although a version of it is universal. But when a black parent's black child is out in the world, you're constantly aware of their safety. And I thought that awareness was how that was being performed, and I appreciated that a lot. But also, it got past that obvious horror movie trope thing, because people weren't making decisions willy-nilly just trying to walk into alleyways and discover whether danger was present. Danger came to meet them. And the only time people were being forced to have to respond to those dangers individually is because the tethered was obviously making decisions to separate them in certain ways.
The whole bit where they kind of like split up and each of the tethered goes after each of the ones at the beginning of the home invasion was definitely manipulative on their part.
Yeah.
Or even the scene in the middle of the road with Pluto when Jason makes the decision to walk backward because he knows that Pluto is mimicking his actions. I also read that as Red knows this and knows that if she waits right here,
she can grab Jason.
She can grab Jason and no one will be able to do anything about it.
The thing for me is, I understand that they're tropes in horror, and I understand that they heighten tension, but I actually really want to see more horror films that have that slasher aesthetic, which this film basically does, actually have characters react in ways that feel more real to the reality, and then have those very smart decisions that they are making, or at least mostly smart decisions, backfire on them anyway, right? So he sees the creepy people standing holding hands. No offense, there's no universe in which I see 2 adults and 2 children holding hands in the shadows standing outside on my front porch, in which I go, let me go outside and talk to them. No, Adelaide's correct. She calls the cops. That's the first thing. That's my first reaction. There are some creepy motherfuckers outside my house, and they're just standing there in the dark looking menacing. You need to send officers over, right? I don't go outside and try to No, I am thinking, this is a home invasion about to happen. There's something bad about to happen here. It's creepy.
I'm gonna be real with you. It is a stupid decision still, like...
Don't go outside.
But I feel like there's a difference between a stupid decision and an unearned decision, and I think that decision was earned. Because I feel like the way that is framed, regardless of the fact that it was a terrible decision and Gabe should have not gone outside, is... Gabe is the one person in that entire family who trusts the system, in a sense, and has no reason to believe that he is going to be under threat in his vacation home in Santa Cruz, and comes outside thinking, hey, I could just reason with these people and they'll figure out we're not looking for anything here. But also, like, the point of that scene is obviously to frame the code switching scene that immediately emerges afterward. To validate that there is a part of Gabe that is like, I am under no threat here. People understand that I'm cool and, like, this is a safe place to be. Oh, do I need to be black in this moment so people can leave me alone? Because I can be black.
That's an interesting interpretation of
Yeah.
that. I mean, I guess there are other moments in it that maybe are better examples. You know, like things like where characters are scared and they just sit still for long periods of time. You know, like when they're in the car, for example, and creepy doppelganger daughter, she's on top of the car at one point. And so what do?
Yeah.
They open the like roof thing so they can
Yeah,
look
they open
out.
up the moonroof. Yeah.
Why? That's an extra layer of protection. Or when she stops and she flops down, but she's still on it, they pause for an inordinate amount of time. And my first reaction is, no, you need to go
keep
again.
moving.
The second she takes that scissor out, you go again and stop really fast because it doesn't really take that much to get somebody to fly off the front of a car. And then you run her ass over and you move on. Or when they do throw her off finally into the woods, the mom gets out of the car to go find her.
To check that she's dead.
No!
Like, no.
I am locking those doors and we are not stopping.
keep
We're
moving.
gone. We are gone. Absolutely the fuck not.
Okay, I'm going to take issue with that because given that we find out at the end that she is originally a tethered, she wants to make sure that her competition, as it were, is dead. So I can understand why, since we know that she is actually from underneath, and knows their capabilities and knows their strengths. She wants to make sure that creepy running girl's not going to get up and come after them still.
Right, so I get that, and again, that's the difference between a stupid decision and an unearned decision. I get the intention, but Umbrae can still kill you if she's alive in the woods, so maybe you don't need to check.
Well, and your family's in the car.
Yeah.
And you've
Maybe-
now put yourself at risk because if she's there, where are the others?
Yeah.
I think that's completely unearned. Her getting out of the car makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, I understand the desire to check. In context, I'm willing to permit it, but it's still not a perfect decision because I just find Adelaide could have just gone, you know what? Maybe she's not dead, but I have 3, and my family is in this vehicle. We're leaving. I don't need to verify this at this moment.
Like, the second they find out that there's like mass killings happening in Santa Cruz, they go to Santa Cruz. No, I'm sorry, you are in the hills, the Santa Cruz hills. I am driving my ass away from any populated center at that point. Because the only thing that can happen is you run into more of these red jumpsuit doppelgangers who are going to murder you. And as you've seen on the television, the ones that are your doppelgangers are being nicer than all the others, because all the others are just running around indiscriminately murdering.
Well, Adelaide's driving,
No, she's not. It's the daughter.
but Adelaide takes over the driving at one point.
She at one point takes over. Yeah. Okay, so are you trying to say that when it's revealed that she's actually the one from the underneath, that's the reason?
She's got in her mind about that, yes.
I mean, okay, but then that's completely unearned because the only reason that makes any vague sort of sense is because we're told through a flashback that she's the original.
It doesn't work until it's a fridge moment after the movie, and the movie doesn't quite do it right. I think we do see her falling back on her innate nature. And we really see that in the fight between the two of them.
When she starts doing that screechy sounds.
Yeah. I think as this process is going on, she's starting to think more like the tethered and danger of them. That's why she goes to Santa Cruz, as silly and strange and stupid as it is.
That bit about her starting to mimic the sounds or her exhibit those sounds makes way more sense and is to me much more interesting if we interpret that without that last scene.
You can interpret it as becoming the monster, yeah.
Right. That's how I would interpret it that as. And I think that's interesting because then it gives us something to try to interpret about who these underworld people are and how close they are to our human nature. Going back to something, Brandon, you were saying that perhaps it brings us much more of a linkage to this allegory about an underclass within society that every other element of our society is structured literally on top of, but is again undermined by those decisions at the end to tell us things that frankly we don't need. None of that's necessary.
Yeah. So I was going to wait until around this time to essentially say, and this is weird to say because the way that Jordan Peele is typically discussed in the public consciousness is his films are making decisions that are obviously very radically distinct from a horror canon. And I think that is mostly true, and I think that that's distinctly true in Us. Especially, like, it is obvious that he is very thoughtful about what is in the frame at any individual moment in time, and in particular is very fond of reference, and is very well read about the horror genre. But I think that, through no fault of his own, but might be uniquely a kind of navigation of trying to portray his genuine intent for a film audience landscape that, in the age of YouTube, likes to be able to say that they know exactly why a thing has happened. Only put some of the things there in that movie so someone would not be in a position to ask, but why is that the case? Why are they tethered? You didn't explain why the tethered are tethered. That ruins the immersion for me. Let's ding it on CinemaSins or some kind of bullshit. And this is me being mean about a completely a thing that has nothing to do with Jordan Peele's movie or original intent. But I feel like, because we know exactly how deliberate he is about the things that are there, the things that do not feel deliberate feel like they are legitimately afterthoughts of the movie that are present to resolve someone else's dispute. Which is why they don't bother me, because I could kind of wipe them from my brain, because they're kind of meaningless to the core in ways that didn't distract severely for me, except for parts of the ending. And I feel like, not only do I think we agree that if the movie didn't have them, it would be a stronger, more coherent metaphor, but you wouldn't notice if they were there or not at all. Like, they're not weighty elements of the movie. They're just present to help someone answer a canon question about a movie that is not about canon, but about the metaphor.
I love what you've said. Obviously, I don't know what's in Jordan Peele's mind, if this is what he's thinking of, but this idea of this film, or even to some degree other films that are in this horror genre and other genre spaces, are very hyper aware that there is a portion of the audience that exists to whom every detail will become like an ammo point in trying to interpret what a film is, to the point that actually having things told to that audience, that I would say a minority of the audience, but sometimes vocal, where they need to have things explained or they cannot get enjoyment out of interpreting through the gaps, that they need the gaps actually spelled out for them. And I'm being very nice about how I'm saying this, because this is a thing that has come up in some director film criticisms and things like that about modern cinema, about how, like, oh, the audience needs to be told all of the things that are true. And, they're just idiots because they can't think about subtext. And so I don't think people are actually that way.
As a critic, and I want to say this on the record because I want people to be able to take this snippet out of this podcast and credit me for saying this whenever it is basically necessary on the internet, which is, if someone who is making media or critiquing media thinks that a portion of the audience, however small, are idiots, then that person should not be trusted with art.
I honestly, to me, I'm like, there probably are audience people who really, I don't think they're idiots. I think there are some people who go to films and they really are looking for a comfortable film experience.
They just want the surface text.
They want the surface text. They want the story that they can easily follow, because what they're looking for is, to use a sort of reductive statement, they're looking for an escape from the real world, right? They don't go to Fast and Furious because they want Fast and Furious to give them complicated subtext, or even to give them really lofty cinematic visionary kind of stuff. Like, literally there's a scene in here where it's just like a shot of it zooming out from literally a wall full of with rabbit cages with rabbits inside of them in this film, which requires you to interpret that. You really have to think about what that opening title sequence actually tells us later. We're not going to get into it. There are people that are like that. I don't think it's actually that many people. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong for those people to be that way.
But also, like, to add to that in particular, I don't think that those people aren't interpreting either. What I mean is, even with us, even with all of the depth of metaphor and interpretation that we can draw from the movie right now, thinking very deeply about history and about visual context and about the history of horror, the movie is also very good at being very consistent about what it means, in a way that if somebody just came to us because they wanted a horror movie, because they wanted an emotionally intense experience for 120 minutes, they would get that. And if I asked them if they got value from the movie, if they saw something about what the movie meant, even if we didn't agree, they'd get something. And I think that you don't need to force feed them essentially canon. You don't need to establish history of the metaphysics of the blah 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 for them to get that thing. I think that the present context of critique, and again, I'm trying to be as kind, I'm probably trying to be kinder than you are, because I actually kind of abhor some of these people. There are videos on YouTube about whether at the end of Annihilation the characters have sex. Because they're like, they're aliens, right? What does this mean about the... But no, you're supposed to think about the body. You're supposed to just think about the... And that means that the question is valid, but it means that it's not about the answer. It's about asking the question. Which gets back to the thing that I think I enjoy the most about us is, I still don't know how I feel about the answer to the question of, what does this say about who is objectively wrong in the engagement of privilege that is core in the movie? But asking the question is ideal. And being able to ask the question is not only a thoughtful appreciation of the movie, but you're supposed to be able to take that outside of the viewing and go, well, how does this make me think about privilege and poverty and wealth and class disparity in the real world, and ask me to do in the real world 40 odd years after that time no one could make a line from Santa Monica to Philadelphia.
Oh, wagging on hands across America.
I mean, you're making me think that, like, if I were to try to, like, encapsulate my theory of film, it would be a sliding scale of intentionality, which would be on one side film that is intending to be art, and on the other side is film intending to be play, and that some films just want to be art, and they go all the way to that extreme side. And some films just want to be play, and they go all the way to the extreme side. But then there's that whole sea of stuff in the middle. Right smack in the middle are films that want to be art, but also play at the same time. I think that this film is trying to be both. It is trying for that middle territory, because on the one hand, it is making very clear horror homages. One of its subversions is the classic horror trope of anytime there's a black protagonist in a movie, they're usually one of the first people to die, usually, or it's sometimes said apocryphally they're the first to die. It's not really that case, but basically they're one of the first to die. Well, in this film, a black man does in fact die first, but he's the villain. At least he's positioned as the villain rather than positioned as a hero. So that's one of those subversions.
And also, obviously, that the 4 black protagonists are the first people to suffer violence. True. And they are all spared. And then their next door neighbors are all white. And they just die like fools.
They die like flies, yeah.
I found it almost humorous that... Or I kept thinking about it as going like, well, our Switch Adelaide obviously wants to make the tethered Adelaide, who's running the family now, who's living upstairs, suffer. So that's why she quote unquote plays with her food. Whereas most of the rest of the tethered are basically just there for murder giggles. So the white family dies horribly and without much. And to the music, I love how they use the counterpoint to the music. Fuck the police. That just delighted
But also good
me.
vibrations.
And also good vibrations too.
All of the music decisions in this movie I like a lot. I hadn't initially prepared to make any thoughts about this, but I've Got 5 on It by Lunez is actually uniquely the most brilliant addition of a song to a horror movie ever that I've ever discovered. Nothing about the song itself is necessary, but its presence establishes things about the world in a context that actually feels very real. We conveniently learn a thing about Adelaide that doesn't gain context until very late in the movie, that we kind of just cast off because assumptions about how movies are made and how music is added to an actual film, that you could just kind of forget it until you regain that kind of acknowledgement that she is not actually snapping in time to this song. But in context, the thing that I value the most about that song is a middle-class family is listening to a rap song about weed. It is obviously about weed. And they don't want to let their children know about it because that's a weird thing for, or at least Gabe interprets it as like this thing that is not the conversation of polite society, but this is the music that he grew up listening to. And there's obviously also a kind of observation of the space that they're in as well, that all of the non-score music that comes up in the movie are by performers who were in the California area at the time. But it's between, like, surf rock on one end, which is, like, uniquely white, and, like, is the observation of what it's like to essentially be safe and, like, not have to worry about poverty or crime or violence in this space. And then lots of hip-hop, which is uniquely about this place is actually unsafe and no one likes me or trusts me, but are being listened by people in this, like, the safest portion of that area that you can imagine, especially in the midst of violence. That Fuck the Police is playing on the Alexa avatar, Ophelia, I think is
Yes.
Ophelia, it's called Ophelia, yes.
precisely at the time when white people are suffering violence.
Yeah. I mean, there's an irony there, right? Because
Yeah.
in the conversations about the police, right, when they call the police, the black family calls the police, our first reaction to that is the police aren't coming because of systemic racism. It turns out, no, the police are just fucking busy. Like, that night,
Yes.
they're running around trying to stop
Yeah,
mass
they're
murder.
dealing with something.
But the family we'd expect the police to most come save have a notorious anti-police protest song by a major hip-hop group playing while they're being murdered. And there's a bit of an irony there that the thing the police should be there for, which is to prevent families from being murdered in their homes, they're not there while a song telling them to fuck off is playing at the same time. So there's a lot of, like, interesting, delicious irony that I really like about some of the song choices. I will just say that if I ever have children, which I'm hoping to do, I am going to be as cringy as Winston Duke is in this movie, as Gabe is.
Yeah.
I am going to,
yeah.
whatever the next generation's dab is, I'm going to do that to my kids in public. I'm going to do it in every way possible to embarrass the living shit out of them. And I don't care because it brings me joy. Watching him dab to his kids was just like, oh, he's the greatest dad.
Gabe is the perfect father.
He kind of
The context of the movie notwithstanding, even the things that we are also being critical of through the class lens of the film are very obviously evidence that Gabe really cares about not just, like, this hollow performance of, like, keeping up with the Joneses, although that is part of it. But part of it is, like, he loves his family, and he wants them to know that this is something that that this is a state that they can relax in. That they can delight in knowing that they've #made it. And that's why he can name his boat the Crawdaddy, and that's why he...
Crawdaddy! That's so
Crawdaddy!
delightful.
It's fucking stupid.
I
I
love it.
I hate it very much, and that's why I love it, and it matters to me a lot that the boat ultimately is very important to the first act of the movie.
Yeah.
Because if they didn't have the boat, not only would he have died, but they wouldn't have been able to begin their escape.
That's true. I'm curious what folks made of... Because we briefly mentioned their white friends with Kate Moss and Tim Heidecker.
Mm-hmm. The Tylers.
The Tylers.
The Tylers.
Who are considerably more wealthy just based on some of the visual cues and some of the conversation cues, that they are considerably more wealthy than Adelaide and Gabe's family, but they're presented to us in a very different way. And I'm curious what all of you made of their presentation. I will note they are an all-white family with demonic twins. I say demonic twins because their doppelgangers are like something out of, like, if Rob Zombie made a Cirque du Soleil show. That's what I expected to be like.
That's a good way of
that
putting
was
it.
wild. To answer your question, so, like, a lot of the things that I think are engaging about us in general is, like, the thing that I think I got from the Tylers are, they're very out of touch, but they're not bad people. They're just very obviously touched by wealth in a way that Gabe and Adelaide are trying not to be, but obviously are still influenced by that.
I mean, Gabe especially because they talk about the car, especially being envious of their car, and then they wind up taking the car. So they're clearly trying to keep up with the Joneses, as you had pointed before.
Yeah.
And so they're, like, held up as that American ideal that they're trying to keep pace with.
But they're not the ideal either, because when you see the contrast between how they are in their relationship, Adelaide and Gabe clearly love each other. You know, they're imperfect, right? Gabe kind of doesn't understand when is best to use humor when it comes to serious conversations with Adelaide, but there's a closeness that exists in that family. But when you look at the other family, they are incredibly hostile and in some cases indifferent to one another. They're very separated.
Well, on the other hand, I mean, that also partially because of the framing and the fact that we don't really see a lot of them doing their own things. I mean, we only touch on them and then we see them get murdered, basically. So we don't get to see their inner lives, as it were.
I'll actually push back on that, because I think when a movie establishes a thing like that, it's supposed to be meaningful. So even if it is brief, that is still supposed to signal to us that this is a clear image of their family life, because it could have been any image. A lot of what the Tylers mean to the movie to me is an observation of how wealth and status is not the same as being perfect, if that makes sense. Like, the idea that this middle to upper class nuclear family unit can be disjointed, can be emotionally disconnected, can effectively be filling gaps in their personality with the possession of objects, whereas the Wilsons are seeing those things and still attaching to those things as markers of having succeeded, without coming to terms with the fact that the actual family completeness that allows them to survive in the first place is more valuable than those things. But the thing that becomes even starker in that sense, since we're talking about the Tylers, is the fact that two of the three things that allow them to be able to survive the untethering in the first place belong to the Tylers. That if they didn't steal the range, they wouldn't be able to drive off. And if they didn't get into the house in the first place, just as the Tylers had died, they would not be in the only house in the area that has light. Because the Tylers are the only house in the area that has
They have a
their
generator.
own generator. Again, with the kind of thoughtfulness that Peele has about that observation of privilege, that these things that were previously just considered status objects are also markers of one's ability to survive in this space. Not just because of the violence, but in general. That when things go poorly, the Tylers were already prepared in a sense for a certain kind of outcome. They just weren't prepared for this one and died like fools. And the Wilsons take advantage of the what were previously simply markers of status, because now it is necessary for them to survive.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of this on, if we're thinking of the kind of allegory about class at work here, you have oddly sort of two extremes, because you have your underclass who, when we see how they live, is really torturous and kind of horrific. They're kind of forced to mimic the ones living on the surface. They don't really have a lot of control over their lives. It's unclear how much control they can really exert over their bodies. And they just kind of live a kind of miserable life of an absence of control. And then on the very far extreme, you have people who have access to all the control they could reasonably want. That family is ultra wealthy. I mean, they're not at the maximum wealth where they're buying yachts, but as far as California is concerned, they don't really want for anything. They can own a summer home that has not just plenty of rooms for them to live in, but has a generator, has fancy cars that cost, $40, $50, $60,000 new. They have fancy technology that controls their lights, etc., etc. He owns a better boat than Adelaide and Gabe do, and yet all of that control ultimately is their undoing, because they can't control the situation that comes for them, and they, as you say, Brandon, die like fools. I say die like flies, because it takes almost no effort to kill them. Whereas Gabe and Adelaide, their family is clearly upper middle class. They have some control over their lives, but they're not at either extreme. And so they have some sense of the precariousness of where they are on the economic social ladder in a way that the other two groups either do to a very extreme degree or don't to a very extreme degree. So there's almost like a scale. That's kind of how I was thinking about it, that if we thought about it that way, it might be a way to help understand why they don't survive. But that kind of falls apart a little bit if you think about, like, literally everybody else just gets murdered indiscriminately in the city. So, and Santa Cruz is full of lots of poor people, which really don't get addressed here, except the one biblical guy who...
Yeah, one biblical guy and his duplicate underground.
He dies. Is he murdered by his doppelganger? Is he actually the first to die?
No, we don't actually see him dead.
His eyes are open, but he looks basically dead. But whatever. Well, anyway, Paul, tell me, what is...
Okay.
Before we get to closing out. Yeah.
Do you guys know what a Dero is? D-E-R-O.
No.
I do not.
Do you know what a Chud is? C-H-U-D.
Yes.
Isn't that a, like, subterranean monster creature that was in...
Yes, it is. Chud, the movie from the 80s, basically came from the idea of Deros, which comes from a guy called William Schaefer, who's writing pulp stuff in the 40s, although he says it was all real, about an underground race of humanoids that had robot-like intentions, were basically oppressed underneath the earth, living in caves, basically an underclass that one day were going to come up and take their rightful place on the earth. And I mean, Shavers claimed this was all real stuff that was all really going to happen. It was just really good science fiction stories that basically explored these ideas of class and consciousness and underclasses and how the rich oppress the poor. So when I was first watching this movie and I see the doppelgangers, I first thought, okay, aliens. Or maybe Fae. But when we see those tunnels, I'm thinking, oh my God, they're doing the Dero! I was delighted that Peele decides to mine something that, aside from Chuds, and Chuds are cannibals, and here they obviously eat rabbits raw rather than eating themselves. So that's an improvement. And there's also some, because I did watch a Chud movie like a year or so ago, there's some unfortunate racial context to the Chud idea in the 80s. Not the original Dero idea, but the Chud. So I'm glad that Jordan Peele has kind of reclaimed Deros as something we can use in science fiction and horror by basically detoxifying the idea.
Fun fact, Paul.
What's that?
Chud, the VHS, is in the movie.
Yeah.
I didn't even catch that.
It's at the very beginning with when the TV goes on and they start talking about the Hands Across America. If you look at the videotapes that are on the
Oh my
shelves,
God, I didn't catch that. That's amazing.
there are other ones there too. I didn't look at that closely, so I'm sure you could take some more interesting ideas by doing a rewatch. But like the Right Stuff is on there and there's some other ones.
Yeah.
So definitely worth rewatching.
That's delightful. So I'm glad that Peele decided to detoxify Deros and kind of use them to basically tell this class-based story, and then subvert it, of course, with finding out that we had someone from the underclass all around, and the leader of them is basically somebody from above, which is almost kind of a
Metropolis-y.
Metropolis-y,
Yeah. Also
Prisoner of Zenda-y in a way.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate how Peele is kind of mixing these Metropolis and Prisoner of Zenda and Deros into the framework of his horror. I mean, as you were saying early on, some of the stuff, when you think about it, doesn't make entirely sense. So, like, how often do they actually have to mimic everything? If they had to mimic everything all the time, that kind of drops the whole concept apart. It's clear they mimic some of the time, and things do rhyme, because Red talks about having been basically raped by Abraham, basically the Gabriel comp, because basically that Abraham is basically mimicking Gabriel's actions. But that clearly can't be all of the time. There's not perfect mirrors throughout the entire movie. Everybody's moving their body language. So they sometimes have some autonomy. And then there's one other thing I want to mention about as far as, okay, so Untethered. What's the symbol of them untethering? A scissor, which cuts. Untethering, basically, they're murdering. I can understand why they're murdering their doubles. They don't want to have to mirror those people and do what they want. They want their own freedom and autonomy. So that's why they're carrying scissors, to free themselves, to untether themselves from those they've been forced to mimic. And then a vocal thing. Consider since we find out that the only untethered who talks is our original protagonist from The Surface, and though she's the only untethered who talks.
Well, others communicate, but...
They only talks, but she's the one who can only actually communicate words. I mean, so it's like... And then on the other hand, our tethered who comes up and poses as her has to learn to get autonomy and get her voice. And it's almost like a nature versus nurture. On the ground, they don't talk, but this tethered, once brought up to the surface, once she gets up to the surface and poses as the daughter, finally can learn to talk. She can have her being out of the underclass allows her to have a voice. I like that real symbolism of that, and the fact that our original middle class being thrown under there mostly loses her voice, but not entirely. It's always raspy and hard to hear, but it's the only voice they have.
Yeah. I will say, though, and this will be the last thing before we get to final thoughts and grades, which is that Josh Tyler's doppelganger, played by Tim Heidecker in both cases, perfectly mimics his above ground's version of the asshole walk.
Yeah.
Because, all right, Brandon, give us your final thoughts and a grade on this film.
Final thoughts. I really enjoyed this. I guess the thought that I'm having is I admire that Jordan Peele is making horror movies that are digging deep into questions of race and class and privilege, and is capable of using very obvious and very non-obvious metaphor in order to pull those things off. I appreciate the fact that he is as well read as he is. Like, one of the things that I like about the fact that Chud appears is that it is proof that he is aware enough about the genre that he let us know what he's drawing on when he makes those things. I am eager to see him not only continue to make work that subverts like the run-of-the-mill assumptions that we make about horror, but to consistently attempt to not have to answer all of these questions for us and trust in our ability to engage with metaphor, because he's good at qualifying what he means. We wouldn't have noticed Chud if we didn't care about what he was trying to tell us, and I want him to continue leaning on that faith in the audience instead of other people's unwillingness to engage. And Hands Across America was a dumb idea, and whoever idea it was, if they're still alive, I hope they continue to live in shame of it.
Oh, God.
I'll give this movie an A.
Wow, okay. All right, Paul, final thoughts and grade, go.
Final thoughts and grade. I really appreciate how Jordan Peele is trying to work with the horror genre. I think Get Out is a better movie than this, although I really like this one a lot. I really like the science fictional horror concepts of it, even if they don't highly stand up. I was just delighted. I was expecting something like, just random doppelgangers or something like that. But when we find out that he's got this whole superstructure, and as you point out, he telegraphs it right at the beginning with the videotape of Chud. It's like, this is a movie I should have had time to rewatch. This is a movie that stands to rewatch. It's a movie that terrified me at parts. It's a movie that engaged me. It's not a perfect movie, so I want to see more what Peele can do when now that he's got a couple of these under his belt. Like, give me more. Come on, I see what you're laying down. I want to pick this up and take more of this. And we didn't even mention the strong acting among the four leads, especially.
Right, yes.
The white characters are there to die like fools or idiots, but our black protagonists and their evil doubles all come off well. And they're acting for two, and they're just such a good job as playing themselves and playing their evil caricatures as characters that rhyme but don't. They were mirrored darkly, and I dug this movie a lot. Okay, I was talking myself into a A-. I'm just going to go with Brandon and just give this an A.
Alrighty, now it comes to me, and I'm about to ruin this party. Let's go.
Time to be a downer.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, but Paul, I wouldn't put a maybe on it. Get Out is a better film overall than this one by, for me, a pretty wide stretch. I would say that given a lot of the stuff that I have mentioned about the issues I have with this movie, for me, I really struggled with the back half. The first half, I was pretty much on board with. Even with the decisions being made about certain horror tropes sort of being brought up, and even though I was yelling at my TV about, like, just get in the car and fucking go, despite that, I was, the first half I was very locked in. I was having anxiety over the way that things were building up and the tension was building up. That was all really good. For me, the second half is where the film lost me in making decisions story-wise that just, to me, did not make sense in the context of the rest of the film. And it annoys me because I can see Jordan Peele's, where he is brilliant as a director and also as a writer, and I just think this one needed a little bit more time, and it didn't quite get it in the way that Get Out is. That said, I'm still going to go see Nope because I'm very curious to see what he's going to do with the alien abduction / invasion narrative. So I like that idea that he's playing with these different kinds of horror tropes. But for me, I would give it a C+.
Okay.
C is better than I thought. I'm sorry.
I don't think it's terrible. I just think it's it's fine. And I just, that's it. It's just fine.
Fair enough. But I think our 2 A's and a C.
Average up to about a B+.
Yeah?
All right, folks. So that's it. We're done. We've made a whole episode. So if you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode or some things we've said
please
here,
do.
yeah, please do. Go to skiffingfantasy.com/listener suggestions. Love to hear your thoughts about us. If you have a different view, if you have a different interpretation on some of the things that we talked about, please send them in. We'd love to hear what you think about this film. So, as always, if you would like to follow us and get more info on what we're doing, you can go to Twitter and Instagram and go to @SkiffyFanty. You can also get our newsletter at skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter, which is run by Stephen Geigen Miller, one of our lovely people. And if you love what we do and you want to support the show in other ways, there are 3 primary ways you can do so. Patreon.com/SkiffyandFanty, where you can get access to special Discord stuff and other fun things. And you can leave us reviews on iTunes and Podcatcher and other places where you can leave reviews. And then you can tell your friends that this show exists and share us on the internets and stuff. As for me, you can find me at Sean Duke on Twitter, SeanDuke.net, Alphabet Streams on Twitch, and Patreon.com/TheJoyFactory.
You can find me, Brandon, at The Rising Tides on Twitter, Patreon.com/TheRisingTides, and on SpeculatorSF.com, where I currently GM Fractal Spire, a Girl by Moonlight actual play.
And you can find me, Paul, Prince Justin on Twitter with the V, PRINCEJVSTIN, Patreon.com/Prince Justin, and many blogs and podcasts, including Tour.com, Nerds of a Feather, and other places I show up. And one day when I get a new computer, yes, I will stream too. I'm Prince Justin on Twitch, predictably.
Awesome. As is required whenever we do a Jordan Peele movie for this show, I will just let you know that I will be starring in the 3rd installment of Key & Peele's version of Football with Weird Names. I will be named Fats Magobo. Don't ask me where that name comes from. I just made it up. But I will be wearing a funny hat shaped like an elf.
Cool. Wait, do you play football wearing the hat? Because I think you need something harder.
Yeah, you put the helmet on and then the hat on top. And it stitches in through the air holes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's safer. We want to be safe.
Cool. Yes, safety first.
Yeah. I want to be clear. I'm not going to be in a skit with them because I am not nearly as funny as those two. I mean, I would love to be.
But, Sean, you have done skits yourself.
Okay, let's not talk about the skits I've done because, good God, someone might go find them from the archives.
Is that how we're going to make things awkward? Look for the things.
No, don't do it. They're so bad. And on that note, awkward ending and scene.
And scene.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/SkiffyandFanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/HolyMole. Thank you for listening.